My name is Ashley Wilcox, and I am originally from Anchorage, Alaska. I am a member of Freedom Friends Church. So Freedom Friends is sometimes called a convergent friends meeting, and it brings together things from the evangelical tradition and the liberal friends tradition. We have semi-programmed worship, and so we start with singing and then have time for gratitudes and petitions, and then a time of open worship, which usually lasts about half an hour. And it is an inclusive meeting, which started out being inclusive of LGBT people, but has ended up being inclusive of everyone. And we have a lot of people with different kinds of disabilities, differently abled, who come to our meeting. And so it's inclusive of all of us. And it's also Christ-centered, which makes it different from North Pacific Yearly Meeting, which is the Liberal Friends meeting in that part of the country. So Friends do not have a tradition of ordaining ministers. Instead, we record ministers, which means recording gifts of ministry that we see in a particular person. And there's a tension there because we believe that all are ministers, but we also see that some are called to sustain public ministry. And so recording a minister is recording gifts of ministry, but also recording that the meeting has seen that person engaged in sustained public ministry. And the recording process at Freedom Friends is fairly fluid. There is a list of about 15 things that happen for the meeting to record a person, and every other thing is the ministry continues. And so it starts with the person may feel a call to ministry, and the ministry continues, and the person feels led to go out and travel, and the ministry continues, and the meeting sees gifts of ministry, and the ministry continues, and then the person meets with ministry and oversight, and the ministry continues. And so it's very fluid and can stop at any point. There's no pressure to begin the recording process or finish it, and there's no set timeline for that to happen. And so in some ways, my recording process took about 5 years, and in other ways it took about 10 months, depending on when you start counting. For me, it really started when I received a minute of service from Freedom Friends Church. And that was around when I was doing work for the Pacific Northwest Quaker Women's Theology Conference. I was traveling to meetings and churches in the Pacific Northwest to worship with them and share about the women's conference. And so the meeting gave me this minute of service that I carried for about 2 years and had a lot of different meetings and yearly meetings endorse. And I would check back in with the meeting, and in the end I wrote a report and gave it back. And I found that after I gave back my minute of service, I felt bereft. I was really, I felt kind of naked without it, that I didn't have this endorsement of my monthly meeting to do the traveling ministry that I continued to do. And I didn't have that kind of support and accountability. And so I went to the meeting and asked them to consider whether I should start the recording process. And we actually went back and forth about it for a while, but eventually we were all kind of on the same page about it. And so after that, I met with Ministry and Oversight, and there's a list of questions that they ask, and they're all actually yes or no questions. And so it was all about whether I had shown gifts of ministry, and the answer to all of them was yes. And so we continued with the recording process, and then I began to meet with a recording committee, which was kind of like a support and accountability committee, but specifically for recording. And one of the first questions that they had was whether it would be appropriate or rightly led for the meeting to record me as a minister before I went to seminary, because I was in the process of applying for seminary when we were meeting, and came very quickly to the conclusion that yes, it would be a good idea to record me before going to seminary as a witness to how friends don't believe that you need credentials to be a minister. And so once everyone was in unity about that, the recording process went pretty quickly. We started meeting in November, and I was recorded in June, the following June. And those meetings were good. They were really challenging. We talked about some of the challenges that I had had in ministry and things that I faced, and questions of power and authority in ministry, and how I was navigating those. And I was a little ambivalent about the recording process. It felt like putting myself out there in a really vulnerable way. And I said to a man who is on my recording committee that I felt like I was putting a big target on my back. And he said, "Don't kid around about this. You're putting a big target on your chest." I was like, yeah, it does kind of feel that way. But it felt rightly led, and I felt really clear to continue with the recording process. And it was a really good experience for me in the end.